Okay, so that's it for the introduction. I'd now like to invite Minister Roger Jaensch to say a few words on behalf of the Tasmanian Government. Thank you, Minister.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dugald, for the introduction, and thanks to Dr. Nigel Swartz and to Professor Mike Rose for the invitation to speak to you here today to open the Forthside Field Day. And I'm very honoured to have this opportunity to represent Minister Jo Palmer, who would love to be here but is elsewhere detained today. She couldn't be here and she asked me to step in, which I'm very glad about because I love horticulture research stations and field days. I was saying to Mike just before, my first real job after university had me travelling from Melbourne, where I grew up, as far away as possible on the mainland to the far western corner of mainland Australia, to a place called Carnarvon, where I was employed by the Department of Agriculture and lived and worked on the Gascoyne Research Station. And if you know the geography of that area at all, that's where there is a little river delta that threads its way through the semi-arid Gascoyne region at the heart of Western Australia rangeland and finds its way to the coast. The river flows once every 3 years or so above ground, but for most of its time it is a series of aquifers, random aquifers that nobody quite knows how big they are or where they flow, just under a sandy riverbed. And horticulture has grown up there over generations of migrants in particular who've arrived into the area, bringing with them expertise and business acumen and innovation, growing things that people hadn't seen before and hadn't seen grown at the time or in the way that they were grown there before. And there's this research station grew up in the midst of all of that to solve problems. And that's what, in my experience, research field stations like this do. They solve problems that are about a particular place and its circumstances at a point in time. And then they take the information they produce and turn it into something that people can use in their agricultural enterprises. And they spread the word about what they've found through events like this one. And after having studied science and going to work in that environment amongst wonderful scientists working with people in businesses across that region, I never practiced science anymore. And since then, my career has been all about the D&E, the finding solutions and bringing people along and making it work side of the bargain. But it all starts with the good science and problem solving and the relationship between producers and researchers that happens at places like this and with rooms full of people just like this one. So I feel very at home here and slightly nostalgic for that 30 years ago. I don't know if it's the science that I miss or if it's the mangoes and bananas and avocados that I had unlimited access to living on the research station, or maybe I just miss being in my 20s and young and windswept and interesting, travelling around outback Western Australia. But either way, it's lovely to be back in a room full of growers and researchers and people communicating the science of what they do. And I'd like to acknowledge all of you who've given up time to be here today, who do the research, who support these programs and who spread the word. And I'd like to acknowledge also my parliamentary colleague, Janie Finlay, who's here today as well. Thanks, Janie, for making the trip and for your interest in what happens here. But so just as in the Gascoyne 30 years ago, research and development and extension are essential for the ongoing competitiveness and productivity and sustainability of Tasmania's agricultural industries right here and right now. Supporting RD&E that delivers on-farm benefits is an important part of the Tasmanian Government's strategy to sustainably grow the the annual farm gate value of Tasmanian agriculture to $10 billion by 2050. We're supporting RD&E in a variety of ways, most notably through the Tasmanian Government's ongoing partnership with TIA. The partnership is the cornerstone of our RD&E approach, and as part of that partnership we've allocated up to $1.9 million from our Agricultural Innovation Fund to 5 projects being delivered by TIA, with more than $2.7 million in additional industry co-funding as well. These projects will deliver practical benefits to berry, vegetable, wine and livestock industries. And I believe that Professor Calum Wilson will be providing an update today on one of these projects, which is focused on management of potato diseases here. This is a particularly relevant issue for many at the moment, I understand, with difficult seasonal conditions for potato growers. Many of you will be aware that Minister Palmer also recently announced a second round of funding for agricultural research projects, with a total of $1.97 million available in this round through the Agricultural Development Fund and the Agricultural Innovation Fund as well. Applicants can apply for up to $500,000 for projects that will provide broad industry benefits, have strong industry support and demonstrate a clear strategy to deliver on-farm impacts. This is a fantastic funding opportunity, and I encourage you to read more about it on the Department of Natural Resources and Environment Tasmania's website and to promote it in your networks. Applications for that close on the 3rd of February 2023. As well as investing in individual RD&E projects, we're also investing in the facilities needed to support research, development and extension so that our researchers and industry have access to the best possible facilities for conducting their work. $5 million has been committed by the Tasmanian Government to upgrade TIA research facilities here at Forthside, as well as at the TIA Dairy Research Facility in Elliot. Combined with the investment by the University of Tasmania, this is a $7.8 million joint project. And having 2 state-of-the-art research farms in the northwest will help underpin our $299 million vegetable industry and $506 million dairy industry, and will establish the northwest of Tassie as a region of excellence for applied agricultural research and demonstration to industry. The new equipment available here will support the continued growth of our horticultural industries, and I congratulate Nigel and his team on the major new Hort Frontiers research program, focusing on cool climate horticulture. And I'm sure that the upgrades here at Forthside will support the research trials that form part of that program. So, about as far away from Carnarvon as you can get without leaving Australia, and 30 years on from when I was there. This place has a similar role, a similar important role in this community and this economy here. The problems are different, but nevertheless, this research facility and the people in it are here to address the unique circumstances, challenges and opportunities of this part of Australia, be they how to make the highest possible use of the incredibly valuable water and soil resources that we have, the challenges of dealing with, in our industry's context, relatively small production units with relatively high unit costs of production, not as far away from markets as Carnarvon was, but with unique challenges like the handling of Bass Strait and the transport and logistics and costs involved with doing that, as well as the continuing and changing challenges that we face in terms of skilled labour, biosecurity and climate change. These are all new, ongoing challenges for people who work in our sector, be they growers, people who are working in marketing, logistics and supply chains, and research and agronomy as well. There'll always be a need for facilities like this and for people who can address those problems, solve them, communicate them and put them to work through their networks and community, largely represented by you here today. Thank you for being part of that essential work, and I'm looking forward to sitting in on the first of the sessions here today. Thank you very much for having me, everyone. Have a great day.
Very much appreciated you making the time out of your busy schedule to come and open our annual day, and to hear those personal stories. So personal stories are always fascinating and really bring authenticity. And what I heard there was working with communities to really progress and take things forward, and that's certainly the ethos we have in TIA. So it's great that we're on the same page as the government in that regard, and we certainly applaud the Ag Development, Ag Innovation funding being industry-led in ensuring that the work we do is as relevant as it possibly can be. With that, I now would like to invite Professor Michael Rose, the TIA Director, to come up and say a few words on behalf of TIA.
Recent weeks and months, and that's presented difficulties, especially for those who are trying to get crops into the ground at the moment, and that you've joined us today. Thank you very much indeed. The mission of TIA is to drive the productivity and sustainability in every sense of the word, of Tasmanian agriculture through underpinning research and industry development. That is research that is informed by the needs of farmers, so it drives it in one way, and then the findings of that research are delivered back to farmers in terms of kind of propelling the industry on and enabling the industry to face the challenges that we do face. We are not short of challenges. Climate change is the first that comes to mind, but maintaining our health, soil health, maintaining in the face of increased climate variability, thinking about leveraging the investment that's been made in irrigation. There are a number of challenges in terms of increased automation as well, and how our farmers kind of adapt to that and adopt it as well. We are not short of challenges that need research that is informed by farmers, but then is also delivered back to farmers. TIA has a mandate to work in this space through what we call the JVA, the Joint Venture Agreement, which is between government and the university, which effectively funds TIA to do this work. TIA, by this measure, is the most successful agricultural research institute in Australia, and as far as I know, across the world as well, because for every dollar that we receive from government, we turn that into $2.5 in terms of research funding that we get from other funders. And as far as I'm aware, that is the biggest ratio there is anywhere in Australia, and it's certainly the biggest that I've come across in my career as well, as I've gone around the world. As the Minister said, Forthside and Elliot have been the beneficiaries of considerable investment in order to bring our farms up to standard of the third decade of the 21st century. There's been, in fact, nearly $8 million put into this farm and into Elliot. 5 million from the government and the remainder from the university, and now is the moment to take advantage of that investment in order that we really can drive Tasmanian agriculture towards that AgriVision 2050, that farm gate value of 10 billion by 2050. On Forthside, what we've got here is an investment in sensors and other precision agriculture. There's been an investment in machinery as well, one of which I can see out the door there. And there's also an investment in irrigation. We also hope to see, and we're in the planning stage for an industry meeting space, so maybe not the next time, but the time after we meet, then we won't be in a tent, but we will have a proper meeting space on this farm as well. Certainly that's in the planning stage. The highlight for me in the horticulture space over the last 6 months is, as Minister Jaensch said, is the research agreement with Hort Innovation Australia, what we call the Fort Frontiers project, which is to support cool climate horticulture in Tasmania. The underpinning drive of that research is to allow our horticulture farmers to become resilient to the climate variability. It's rained so much in recent months, I've begun to think that I'm back in Wales. It's rained far more than I've got used to in Tasmania in recent months. And obviously you can't connect any particular weather event to climate change, but what we are seeing is an increased number of extreme weather events, be it rain or drought or whatever else it is. This Hort Frontiers project will drive the research that will enable farmers to have greater resilience to that climate variability. It then will give them the confidence to further invest into their agriculture, which will then obviously drive forward the agriculture within the state and get us closer to that AgriVision 2050. So with that, I want to thank you once again for coming today. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope that you enjoy the remainder of today's programme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And that just reminds me of what I'm doing the next couple of days. I'm doing a bit of a tour of both farms, along with other colleagues in teaching and research, so that we can use the facilities that are now available on this farm to the best of our abilities in teaching the next generation of agricultural scientists and agricultural managers. So we're certainly looking to take as much advantage as possible of that government investment in our farms. So it's very much appreciated. Thank you very much. So now we move on to the first of the presentations for the sustainability session. And I'm very pleased that we've got Ann-Maree, Donoghue and Kathryn Goulding to present to us today. Ann-Maree has 22 years of experience with TASAg, primarily around seed certification for potatoes, but also just about everything else we've ever done on the farm, including pea and bean cultivar evaluation, potato nitrogen trials and pea trials. Kathryn comes from a family farm, having worked in agriculture, in beef cattle and seed potato production as well. Also worked in the nursery industry and with fresh flowers. So a broad breadth of experience Ann-Maree and Kathryn both have, and are both very well positioned to tell us all about our seed certification of potatoes. So with that introduction, I'd like to welcome Ann-Maree and Kathryn to come up and tell us about the Tasmanian seed potato certification scheme.
Do you want me to go to the next slide first, the introduction?
We'll start there. Perfect. Hi everybody, we'd like to welcome you and say thank you for coming along. We've been introduced, so Kathryn and myself, and the other good looking dude there's Doug Clark, our seed cert manager. So that's a team that look after the seed potato industry here in Tasmania. So the purpose of the scheme, we endeavour to promote a healthy potato industry through our worker certification officers. We can look after between 40 and 45 growers. Those growers can have between 1 and 10 paddocks. Each paddock can be made up of several different varieties or the same variety, and they grow generation 1 to 5 in these paddocks. We do this, we certify around 670 hectares, which are grown all over Tasmania, with the exception of the west coast of Tasmania. We do a minimum of 3 field inspections to check the crop. During this, we check for variety mixes, plant health, pest diseases, and any other problems. We also do a tuber inspection at the end at harvest to ensure a sound line of potatoes are grown.
So just a little bit about the history of potatoes in Tasmania. They've always grown really well in Tasmanian soil. Issues that we see today, like nematodes, scabs, soft rots, they were all recognised back as early in the 1900s, same problems. This led to a Potato Act being introduced, and so under this Act the growers were tasked with prevention of the spread of disease, much the same as we try to do today. So measures were taken, basically spraying, and that combined with the favourable weather conditions in Tassie enabled the potato industry to flourish. The Tas Seed Scheme began in 1930, and in 1933 the Tewkesbury potato station started to grow mother seed, which is generation 3. That photo there is they're being weighed and inspected. So in more recent times, the DPI took over the governance of the scheme in the 1960s. There was a mini tuber facility built at Stony Rise in 1986, and the production of mini tubers and tissue culture commenced in 1988. As part of the joint venture agreement, TIA took over the scheme in 2007. The Tasmanian tissue culture collection, it was quite a bit larger than what was held on the mainland, and this at Toolangi, and this was due to the large number of fresh market varieties, which Tasmania is quite well known for. And the tissue culture collection was maintained up until 2012. So there was a changing of the times. In about 2001, it was recognised that the potato industry would be better served to have a unified set of guidelines for seed potato growers around the country to follow. So this is when the national standards began, meaning there was consistency across all the seed schemes. So the national standards is what we follow with the rules and guidelines for the growers. The scheme has been very successful in helping to achieve the aim of a sustainable potato industry for Tasmania. Tasmania has an area freedom status from PCN and a very low virus hit. If any virus has been detected, it's been taken out of the scheme. These factors give Tasmania seed potato growers an edge for selling into the mainland market. So any seed lines that go to the mainland that have to go into a certification scheme, they'll be virus tested, PCN soil tested, and a Dickia test will be done. This will make them eligible for the gold label for certified Tas seed.
Okay, so basically what we do for certification, Tasmanian certification is a seed potato scheme, is now governed by TIA with industry and growers input. Seed certification is an independent service provided by TIA to the potato industry in Tasmania. This enhances industry relationships and by providing a solid foundation for sustainability for our future. As part of our field inspections, there's a couple of pictures here and a sheet that we do. So for our field inspections, we walk the crop looking for any issues, whether it be variety mixes. I'm not sure in one of those slides you could see it, but I don't think it's come up big enough. Wildlife damage as shown in the bottom photo. And we also look, the correct spacing has been left between the generations, that lines are clearly marked and the names and generations are on that sheet. And we even check for weed control. The sheet, even though it's not really clear, is what we fill out. So it has the grower's name, the variety, generation, and all this information's on there. We walk the paddock, and if we find any problems, it's noted on that, and there's different things that have to be under a certain percentage. So with that, we go through, we do a count and check that it's within the guidelines for it to stay in certification. Sometimes this means that part of the paddock can be rejected.
Another part of what we do is at harvest time we do the tuber inspections. So for each 20-tonne load that comes into the cool stores, we do a 400 tuber inspection, and this is quite a thorough visual inspection. On a B double, we up that to a 600 tuber inspection. So you'll see in the pictures there some of the defects that we do find and which can actually knock a load out, so they're not certified. So we've got some nematode there in the centre, and we've got insect damage down this side, some soft rot up the top, and some mechanical damage, and we also of course find the common and powdery scabs. So there's a tolerance for these, and if the percentages are too high, that is when the load is rejected. In this case, there is often the chance that it can be regraded, and we may do a re-inspection. So at tuber inspection time, each load has an ID number, which allows us basically traceability of those seed lines and where they end up in the next growing season. And this is just an example of the tuber inspection report that we fill out at the tuber inspection time with all the details needed as well. So even though this role has its challenges and is at times quite demanding, we find it very rewarding as we both have a passion for the humble spud.
Thank you. Oh no, no question.
Okay, we do have some few minutes for questions. So feel free to put your hand up and ask any questions. That's on? Yep, that's on. Okay. Okay, people are being shy. So I'll just start off by saying, well, as someone who's mostly worked with natives and then since then cherries and apples, what was I supposed to be looking at in the sack with spuds? Was there a particular... I know it's embarrassing. As a Tasmanian, I shouldn't say that. But what was there any particular message in that?
No, just to show
Different varieties.
the colour. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Certainly, I have seen some of those purple ones up in the highlands of Peru, which was a very exciting time of my life. And also, as a Tasmanian, I very much appreciate the work you do, because who doesn't love some nice hot chips, right? Okay, now I've seen a couple of hands. Yes, please.
My question is, what do you do for weed management in your crop?
So
Because with potato, with Solanum tuberosum, often weeds of the same genus will grow together, like Solanum nigrum. So how do you manage weed management?
we don't have to manage it, the grower does. It's for us to...
I've now got the microphone.
Yeah. So our growers, you know, there's an expectation the weeds are kept under control, so it's up to them to manage
So
it.
is there any feedback from the growers to TIA to say, well, look, you know, I've got so many hectares of potatoes and I found this fabulous weed. What do I do with it? You know, is it like, you know, Jurassic thistles or something like that? Or if it's something that's unknown. So what happens if I'm growing potatoes and all of a sudden I find, oh my God, I've got some very strange weed here. What do I do?
Well, we would direct them to talk to their agronomist.
Agronomist.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's right.
Okay.
Because we can knock a paddock out for too many weeds.
I can knock a paddock out, believe me, with a whole lot
Yeah.
of weedicide.
Yeah. I've got farmers that go out and hand pull, you know, fat hen all
Okay.
the time. Yeah. But
Thank you.
We we don't decide. Yeah. So
Can I just make a comment? If it's an unknown weed, we've all got a general biosecurity responsibility if
if it
it's
was
something
yeah.
unknown to report it and make sure that it's dealt with in an appropriate way.
yeah.
Otherwise, if it's a normal weed, we deal with our agronomist, but if it's unknown,
Yeah.
please
Correct.
contact biosecurity.
Thanks, Sue. That's a very good point. And further questions, please. Calum. Oh,
Just a quick comment following on from your thing earlier on about the difference in those spuds. I mean, all that lovely purple coloration's full of good, healthy anthocyanins, a bit like cherries. So while you're snacking into your cherries, you should snack into some of these purple potatoes too for a health benefit. They're a very healthy product.
And there's bags of them in there to take
Exactly,
home and grow.
exactly.
Okay, so everyone, Calum's health advice is eat more chips. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Have a beer while you're at it. All right. Well, thanks very much, Kathryn and Ann-Maree. Really fascinating presentation. Really appreciate you putting that together. Thank you. Okay, so next I'd like to invite Theresa Chapman to come up and present on her PhD research. Theresa is looking at the hypothesis that increasing plant diversity benefits the soil under grueling conditions of intensive cropping, an essential and important topic, I'm sure you'll all agree. So please take it away, Theresa. Thanks.
Thanks, Dugald. First, I'd like to add my acknowledgement of our First Nations people and my deep admiration for the skill and knowledge they have in managing land. I asked a mentor of mine what I should talk about today because I wasn't sure what would be valuable to you as an audience. And they said I should talk about what I'm most enthusiastic about. So I'm not going to talk about my PhD project much. I will. That's just a joke. I will nerd out about that later. But first I wanted to talk about why I think it's valuable to think and speak and learn about soil ecology. Is this going to work for me? Where do I point it? At you, or do I just nod at you? Is this like a trick? If you go back one, I'm not quite ready for the change. I was just testing. So our soil, it's the most biodiverse habitat on the planet. And it's also the biggest terrestrial store of carbon. So it's just a really key living system in terms of climate and biodiversity. And biodiversity itself is really critical and really valuable to our living systems. Especially in times of change, it's really important in terms of stability and resilience. So biodiversity is worth preserving. And I think it's worth saying not just because it's useful to us, but also because every species that exists has a right to exist on the planet. So we should work to protect it whenever we can. It's been spoken of today about how we want to grow Tasmanian agriculture. And one thing that came to my mind when I heard that is that we don't want to grow at the expense of biodiversity in terms of production goals. So if I could change. Our cropping agriculture is dealing with pretty altered systems because our current model involves a lot of practices, somewhat inevitable in lots of cases, that are damaging to the soil ecology. Most of the world's food is grown in soil still, despite advancements in different technologies. So these operations are generally carried out at some stage, not all of them, lots of people aren't burning anymore, but sometimes people burn. I know Doug's quite fond of it. Sorry, Doug, that was throwing you under the bus there. But at the same time, these operators are growing all of our food and fibre and keeping the cost of living at an affordable rate. And so we should all be grateful. Can we do it better? Probably. And stacks of farmers are. And around, even in this valley, there's people doing strip till, no-till. I look around sometimes and see the lines from the ripper mulcher, which always brings me a lot of pleasure as the VegNet extension officer before Aussie. There's controlled traffic, and you all have to ask John McPhee about the latest gantry tractor that's just been released onto the market. Very exciting. And of course, cover crops, which are quite common around here and elsewhere in Australia. And I'm going to talk more about cover crops later. This conversation about how we should be growing food can be quite contentious and binary. I don't think that's important. I don't think we need to be black and white about it. Change can absolutely be incremental. And my theory is if we keep the soil ecology in mind as a key living system on our farms and something that's quite valuable to us and our production, then at each decision point you come to, you can make a slightly kinder or more gentle or less damaging decision, and that can really have big gains for our soil biodiversity. Okay, thanks. So I'm going to roughly outline the soil living system and then get into why it will greatly repay your conscientious decision making. Soil is absolutely teeming with life. Thousands and thousands of species in any little part of it that you care to pick up. The real hotspot of all this activity is the rhizosphere, and the rhizosphere is the part of the soil that plant roots are directly interacting with. So plants are driving this whole system. They photosynthesize and make a whole bunch of carbon-based sugary substances, and they'll release as much as half or 60%, not always that much, into the soil around their roots. And this drives the biological community, and these things have been evolving together since there was plants on the planet. So this is a really complex, sophisticated system. The microbiology is communicating with the plants are communicating back, the fungi is taking messages between plants and across the soil profile. These things are trading substances. Plants are encouraging certain communities and discouraging others to get what they need from the soil. It's things we're just beginning to learn about, and it's really exciting and really active. And all of this activity is producing sticky slimes and mucilages and strings and threads and waste products that create the stable aggregation in the soil that's key to so many soil processes. This process is all pretty carbon-based. All of these sugars are carbon-rich as well as other important plant nutrients. But this is one of the reasons why soil organic carbon is a good proxy for soil quality, because organic carbon is the substrate and the currency of this sort of marketplace. And so when we measure soil organic carbon, we get a good idea of how this system is functioning. And also, of course, there's the issue of soil carbon comes from atmospheric carbon. In the atmosphere, it's a bit of a problem at the moment. In the soil, it's quite good. So there's a win-win situation there. The main services that the soil does for us are related to water. So a really good, stable soil structure allows more water to infiltrate in a rainfall event, so less or a slower time before it starts moving across the surface. And that's crucial for topsoil erosion, which we should all be working to avoid if we can, because our topsoil is what we've invested in on farm. And if we lose it, we lose our investment and it ends up in a place where it's nothing but a negative impact. So topsoil erosion is a big deal. Also, water storage. So more water can get in and more water can stay in the plant zone where your crop can use it. If you have a high carbon functioning soil, and any little gain in the depth of that biological functioning is a big gain in potential water storage. So plant nutrients are obviously applied a lot, but even when we apply them as synthetic ferts, we generally need the microbiology to do some amount of work to convert them into plant available forms. Not always, but for the most part. So that's really critical. We really need those biological functioning systems to be occurring in the plant root zone. And plant nutrients are also cycled and held onto by that biological system. So if the nutrients can be taken up, and that microbiology loves the nutrients as much as your crop does. So if they're healthy and resilient, they can take up those nutrients and keep them there for the plant. Sometimes the synthetic inputs can be disruptive of the plant microbiology relationship, and that's a bit of a problem. A lot of our fert is very acidic, and that can cause problems, and if we band it in because we don't want to do another run later. I have a great anecdote of a farmer that used to put on a lot of super, and he swapped his super, this is a beef farmer, but he swapped his super to where he dissolved it in water, and immediately he could use half the volume of superphosphate that he'd been applying. So there's big gains to be made, especially in fertiliser use efficiency. So the day I learned what our average fertiliser use efficiencies was, I was a bit shocked, and I think we should be working really hard at bringing those efficiencies up, and our microbiology can help with that. Yep. So resilience is a bit of a nebulous concept, but I mentioned topsoil erosion. Biodiversity in general is good at keeping things stable and functioning in extreme events. When plants go through stressful events, if they've got really good root systems with lots of interaction with the microbiological community, particularly the fungi, they can get through those stressful times often much better than if not. So resilience in general can be boosted by having a good, healthy, biologically functioning soil. Now, because plants are the drivers of all of these processes, ultimately, the more and healthier plants you can grow, the better, bigger system you'll have underground. And a lot of you in the room who are growers are really great at growing big, healthy plants, so you're ahead of the game. And this is also where cover crops can come in. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the concept of a cover crop, it's a crop grown in between commercial crops, generally not harvested, and almost always grown for a soil health benefit. That's generally the goal. Another important aspect that I'll talk about as playing into my project is plant diversity. So nature never grows a monoculture, but we generally find monocultures much easier to manage, and I can totally relate to that. And all of you will have an understanding of how important plant diversity is and how useful when you're trying to find a paddock that's never grown potatoes to grow your potatoes in. So there's lots of benefits to plant diversity. It's quite complex. So you can have diversity across time or diversity in the same place. And it's a really useful thing for your soil biology, although quite hard to find statistically in the science and the literature. So for my project, I thought the value of cover crops is pretty well established, and the real question is, can the benefits of plant diversity be accessed in a short window of a cover crop while you're also then cropping through the rest of the year with the inevitable disturbance that vegetable cropping entails? Yep, Michele, thank you. So this is basically my research question. I'm working on a pithier title. I'll let you know. We've still got a year and a half. And the picture is my little Huey mixing up the seed. And one thing I've come across in my own interactions with farmers and people working in more regenerative practices, sorry to drop a little contentious word in there, is that it's quite fun and creative. So I mixed up this seed with Dave Roberts-Thompson from Van Diemen Quality Bulbs, and I had my child there, and it was all lovely, and we bounced ideas around, and so we got to design this lovely crop of plants and think about what each plant was going to do. And I found it quite a nice process, and I think a lot of growers are getting that out of it too, just as an irrelevant aside. Yep. This is my supervision team, my very clever, very generous supervisors, most of whom are here today. Yep. And this is the layout of my field trial. So my field trial is actually here at Forthside, and if you look directly behind us, the bare paddock that's been drilled with barley is paddock 14, and on the southern half of it, so on your left, is my field trial. And you can see it's got a nice bit of residue on the surface, whereas the other side, not so much, right, Doug? Interestingly, Doug and I went up there with a spade the other day, and he and Ant, who works here, found that the side that my cover crop trial was on one side and it was just lupins on the other side, and he actually thought the texture and structure of the just lupins bit was looking much better. And I agree, my half was a bit trickier and a bit less nice for a seed drill. I'm hoping that was just one moment in time. But I'm not biased at whatever result comes through. These are my data streams. So I'm taking a measure of microbial diversity, activity. I'm extracting the mesofauna, which are like little bugs, collembola and mites for the most part, less than 2 mils in size. And they're also a indicator of soil structure because they can't move soil like an earthworm can. So theoretically, the more and the larger of those you have, the better you're doing from a structural perspective. And they're also, top dogs in the soil biology world. So they for me, they're sort of an integrated factor that might show up something interesting. Soil chemistry, I'm sending off to the AgVita, our fantastic local soil lab, for just the basic soil tests that most farmers would get done. Cover crop biomass and the yield of the commercial crop, which for the first year here was a bit tricky because it's poppies. So they measure the alkaloid content. And I can tell you now, nothing showed up. Yep. So some results I've got, and I have to say, I should mention I have another field trial site at Carrick on a pretty tricky duplex soil. So sometimes working on the soil here is really underwhelming because it's so good that nothing shows up from a change of management. It always just is awesome. So that's frustrating. And in Carrick, it's a more challenging duplex soil. And my thanks to Rob Dent for allowing me to set that trial up, and for Doug and Ant here, and Dave Roberts-Thompson, who I think just arrived. Hi, Dave. For helping with the seed, and Rob Dent designed the seed mixes at his place. So it's been great to work with industry members and have that sort of interaction. This is in Carrick. You can see how devastating I was to make this graph because it's just amazingly consistent. Like this is just a ryegrass compared to peas and oats compared to a 4-way mix compared to a 16 species mix, and they looked quite different, but at the end of the day, they all had pretty much exactly the same biomass, so that was disappointing. And here's some more biomass measures. One thing is that this is going to be a 3-year project. Ultimately, soil is slow from all of my reading, and that's why PhDs in soil are tricky, but I've only got two data points for now from the first 2 seasons, and you can't make a line out of 2 points. So I'm hoping that I see by the 3rd season things starting to resolve. But for now, maybe a little bit of a suppression. And I'm sorry, these aren't in order by species mix, and I'm not sure if you can see, but this is the 16 species, 4 species, 1 species, 2 species. I'm terrible. Here's an advice to students. Get good at statistics and using programs to look at data. I'm so bad at it, and it's quite crippling, as you may be able to tell. The point is there's not much to see from my data. You can change that, Michaela. Mesofauna is looking slightly interesting. So this is them separated into the size classes, and the blue is the monoculture. I just took samples from the 1 species and the 16 species mix under advice from a really experienced mesofauna specialist. And you can see the numbers aren't interesting, but the proportions in the larger size classes are interesting. And if you change that again, Michaela. Oh, that's turned out terrible on the thing, hasn't it? This one's got, so this is from the middle of the cash crop, which is interesting that there might still be an effect. I haven't statistically tested any of this. It could be nothing. You can change it again. And then this one is season 2. So, if we get a season 3 and it looks even more of the larger ones and more numbers in the diverse, then maybe there's a pattern there. But it's hard to say at this stage. Yep. And soil respiration, I'm using a commercially available test called a CO2 burst from Solvita. And universally, they have been completely non-events, no changes. So, thanks so much to my supervisors and to the farmers I'm working with and to the people here at the research farm. It's been amazing to have a whole paddock to play with and to set up a trial like I have and to get Doug's support whenever I need it. This photo is paddock 14 in full growth. So I thought it looked really beautiful. Any questions?
Thank you, Theresa. And that's a really fantastic presentation. What really came through was your enthusiasm. So I think that was good advice from your mentor. Also, your expertise is really clear and your background in extension. What I really love is how you stir Doug. I think that's a real talent.
More of that, you think?
Yeah, you're an inspiration to me on that front. And it's good to see John McPhee here. I think I saw him earlier. So great to have you here, John. Good to see you here.
And John is still helping me out in the field every time, and he's retired. So extra special thanks to you, John.
Thank you, John. And I just wanted to make a comment from a tree crops perspective, actually. So we've got an industry player down south at Old Beach near Hanson, and he is very focused on soil health, so much so he's invested in a commercial composting business. And what he talks about at Field Days is it's not only improving his soil health, it's improving his profitability, because his trees are so much more resilient to climate variation and just a lot more efficient at using the nutrients that he puts on. So sustainability is important, but it actually leads to profitability as well. It's not just about a feel-good fuzzy thing. It's about staying in business as well.
I mean, the other thing about that, Dugald, is that social licence is also something that I didn't mention that is important, and we may be approaching a time when growers have some demands on them for market access to prove that they're sustainable in some way or another. I'm not sure what that might look like, but also something worth considering.
Yeah, no, that's a really valid point. Okay, so some questions for Theresa. Sue, go for it.
I can put my big girl voice on. Theresa, just a quick question as an old poppy person. You said there was no difference in the alkaloid content. Was there any difference in the straw, like the tonnes per hectare produced off any of your treatments?
Did we get a straw measure? Yeah, I don't think so. They found some differences across the paddock, but it seemed to be much more related to top of the slope, bottom of the slope kind of thing, rather than and that's the thing about soil science, is there's so many other factors always affecting your data that it is hard to resolve things into.
And poppies too.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Sue. Other questions for Theresa? Yeah, Mike.
Can you tell us what mesofauna is? Sorry. Can you tell us what mesofauna is and why are they important?
So it means middle, so they're not micro and they're not the macrofauna. And they are completely ubiquitous in soil, which makes them an interesting thing you can always find. And they have little legs and they move around the soil profile, but they cannot engineer the soil in the way that a worm or something larger can, like a cricket. So they reflect the underlying structure of the soil because they live in the soil, but they can't shift it. They just have to exist with whatever conditions are there. So that's why they are an indicator of soil structure. And soil structure in return is an indicator of lots of yield factors and soil performance factors. So it's a really interesting. And for me as an ecologist, because they tick a couple of boxes in that they need all the smaller things to eat and they need the structure as their habitat, they're sort of reflecting a collection of factors that you might not be able to pick out individually.
Jason and then Mike. Other Mike. Mike Badcock.
Thanks, Theresa. Just a follow-on from the question around the mesophora and the diversity. Have you considered looking at what is the evenness of that diversity within its spread? Not so much total numbers of different species or what have you, but does it become more even, or you might still have the same bulk number of species, but there's only a few of one and a lot of another, and they may be shifting towards more even or more diverse in that sense?
So the test I'm using for diversity is called an ecoplate, and it's more of a measure of functional diversity, and I think I will get a measure of evenness from that test. It's quite complex, and I'm not across the full implications of the results from that, and also there's no interesting differences yet in that. So, but that's one of the dilemmas, right? So if you're interested in soil biology, and this is particularly pertinent for farmers who want to know more, I think, you can send off to the lab and get this long list of what the species they can find the DNA of in your soil sample, but what does that mean? And it's expensive. So you've spent $500, you've tested this much soil, and you've got this list of species names, and maybe the lab will give you like a good, medium, bad rating, but it's so opaque and so hard to know what it all means and what you should do about it. So one of the goals of my project is to look at some of these things, and especially the less expensive ones, and say, is this responding to management? Is this a worthwhile test for you to think about in your operation? That's definitely one of my stated goals.
Yeah, thanks,
Please, Mike.
Dugald. Theresa, the biggest thing I've seen in my experience with cover cropping is the soil structure, is how it mellows and ends up like an ash bed. Can you measure that, and also the amount of water it can take in over a period of time? With cover cropping, it seems much more friable, and you can plant carrots into it and they don't have any lumps in the ground. Same with potatoes. A lot of things like that, but it's important if you can measure that potentially. Yeah,
absolutely, Mike. And potato yield has been linked very strongly to structure by Bill Koching, I think, did quite a bit of work on that. And that's nice that anecdotally you've had that experience. Measuring soil structure is tricky, and anything you do in the field is so dependent on soil moisture that it's hardly worth doing from one day to another, it's just different. So you can, I'm not taking a direct measure of soil structure. I'm hoping the mesofauna are going to stand in for that. It's because I'm not a physicist, and I spoke to Marcus Hardy about some possibilities, and it was all just a bit tricky, and so I skipped it. I mean, I'm a PhD student.
It'd be nice to do everything, right?
Yeah.
Good on you, Theresa. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Really enjoyable.
Great.
Okay, now to wrap up the session, we have a panel discussion, and we've got Calum Wilson on our two-person panel who's a professor in plant pathology and leads an internationally renowned research group in, amongst other things, potato diseases. We've also got Audrey Leo from Simplot, who's a research scientist with Simplot, and she's very passionate about sustainability and food security, and in the development and implementation of responsible agriculture technologies, which are now widely used to aid Australian growers. So also we have our very own, well, not that Calum's our own, not our own, but an additional person from TIA in Michele Buntain to facilitate the discussion. Michele has experience in extension in the horticulture industry with TIA. Has worked with the berry industry for over 20 years and has worked on some really exciting, interesting boutique crops in the past, such as wasabi, ginseng, green tea and medicinal herbs. So if the panel could jog up here and come down here like the famous people they are, then we can get into that. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for coming along. Really appreciate it.
Are you gone?
No, I haven't.
Wide for sound?
Will I make noises? I don't think so. I'll borrow yours then.
Just came on. Michelle, yours just came on.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. I can hear myself echoing. Okay. To start things off, I'm not a potato person, and so I'd like to get an idea of who in the audience is involved in commercial potato production, supports the potato industry through agronomy or research or funding. I think our funder just walked out the door, but that's okay. So if you put your this is important, put your right hand up if you somehow support the potato industry through, if you're a grower or you're a researcher or...
What about eating them?
Oh no, you've got ahead of the game there. Ahead of the game. Right hand if you're a potato grower or you do something, irrigation, if you're an industry person, you support them through advice or... Yeah, great. Mike, come on. Okay, now with your left hand, put your hand up if you eat potatoes and you really enjoy them. Yay! Okay, it's looking much healthier. That's great. Okay, so the reason... I should sit down actually, because then I'll be part of the panel. The reason we're here is because there's new funding that Calum is working on, and also Audrey from Simplot, and it's funded by the Tasmanian government through the Ag Development Fund, which is very exciting, and it's all new. So, but because it's new and you're potato people, I want you to ask questions as well. I've got a very limited list of questions here. So I'll start by asking my first question of Calum as to, can you give us a snapshot of the project and what it's all about?
Look, thanks, Michelle. Yes. Well, first should acknowledge, as I said, this project was supported by Tasmanian government through the Ag Development Fund, and also Simplot financially, as well as in kind. We also have a large number of members of the potato community, growers and agronomists, who are also providing significant input into the project. We've got trials being set up as we speak in terms of monitoring potato growth. So this project is really about trying to understand potato diseases better in our environment. It's split between foliar diseases and soil-borne diseases. So we've looked at the two major foliar diseases, the two blights, early and late blight, and focus on two soil-borne diseases that are problematic for Tasmania in particular, with powdery scab and pink rot. It's got a global aim of trying to understand really how these diseases grow and progress and cause us issues in the Tasmanian system, and to develop a better understanding of, I guess, or even modelling how they might progress through the season. With that greater understanding, that'll allow growers to make better decision making in terms of interventions. Do you need to spray or do you not need to spray for your foliar diseases? But also better understanding in terms of management of that crop. You know, do you terminate early? Do you irrigate now or don't irrigate now? Is this crop going to be useful for going into storage, or is this one that we need to process straight away? So to assist in that management process. It's also going to help both growers and researchers, for that matter, understand the dynamics of disease and how that develops through the season. At the moment, it's a bit, particularly the soil-borne disease, is a bit of a black box. We kind of plant our crop. We might have an idea of the amount of pathogen that's kind of sitting around, but we don't know really what happens until we harvest, and then all of a sudden we go, yay, or we go, oh my God, it's terrible. We're trying to understand how that develops through time, and that might also then help us work out how effective interventions have been. You know, if we put in a pre-plant fungicide, what has that done? What's the benefit of that? And if we can monitor as things go, and we can actually say, well, actually, we delayed disease by 2 weeks, and that's actually given us this benefit at the end. You know, it helps our decision-making process in the future too. So that's part of it. The other part, from a longer-term sustainability perspective, is diseases are driven really by three main factors. You've got the pathogen. You got this bug here. I think Ann-Maree and Kathryn were talking about how. And Theresa were talking about how the root exudates would encourage all these good bugs and that interactions with the host. Well, they also encourage the bad ones too, which is the pathogens. And so the presence of the pathogen is one aspect of a disease. The host itself, the host plant, how susceptible it is, what age it is, what stage it's growing at, is obviously another really important factor in how they interact. The other is the environment they grow in. So for the foliar ones, it's the environment around the air and around the leaves. With our soil-borne diseases, it's in that soil environment, that wonderful black box that we understand so poorly. But that creates essentially the house for the pathogen and the host to live in, and how they interact. You know, is it in good order, or is it in poor order? Now that will also change with time too. So we are hoping to, by developing these sort of models or these systems, to understand what happens under different environmental conditions. Maybe if we look forward and we say, well, look, on average things are going to increase with temperature, or we're going to have greater or more volatile weather events. We're going to have wetter seasons such as we currently have, or drier seasons. What is that going to do to disease looking forward? And so we may be able to have some thoughts about making things more resilient into the future. But that's, you can tell I'm an academic, I talk too much, but yeah.
You talk about decision making and the models that you're going to develop, hopefully. There's already potato disease models out there in the world. How useful are these at the moment, and how will yours be different?
Yes, so we do, I guess, there are models out there, mainly for foliar pathogens or foliar diseases, but not so many for soil-borne diseases. And I think a big chunk of this project will obviously look into that soil-borne diseases. We are working quite closely now with Colorado State University, who is actually developing a model for powdery scab as well. So just getting some of the learnings and then apply it into here and trying to build up on that knowledge is probably going to be quite important to see how that can actually be validated to Tasmanian condition. At the same time with the foliar diseases, the models are already out there, European models, the UK's and everything, and also in America as well. We know that a couple of people in Victoria, like Steve Johnson and Nigel Crump, is actually working on foliar diseases models for late blight. And what we're trying to do is to see whether we can actually validate some of these models to Tasmanian conditions, because models can be out there, but if it's not validated, then there's probably no point for us to use it. So that's essentially what we're working on with those already existing models out there. But,
And because it's Tasmanian research based in Tasmania, they'll be really relevant for Tasmanian growers. Yeah.
Correct, yeah. And we've got so many different cropping systems as well in between, like the potato, and this is where I guess Jason's expertise is going to be really, really important for this particular project, is to really understand how do we fit in with all the other cropping systems that are already available in Tasmania as well.
You mentioned that the way you're going about this project over the next few years is a little bit different to how you've run previous research projects. How are you going to work that?
So the idea for us is to actually have a key industry, like key growers and agronomists that we put together as a working group. So on an annual basis, we go back onto that group, and we're also open to, getting more people involved as well if you guys are wanting to be involved in. But those selective key growers and agronomists would come in on an annual basis, mainly probably about twice a year. And then whatever learnings that we've got from that particular project, we give it to them. And the idea is for them to, if, for example, we have developed a model or validate a model to Tasmanian conditions, then we ask them to actually test it out and see whether that actually works for them or not. Because we're not going to be, it's not a project where we develop a model and then at the end of 3 or 4 years, then we'll give it to you guys like, here you go, use it. Like, that's not something that we actually want to do. So understanding the growers and the agronomists' needs are the main thing for us to make sure that it get implemented to your cropping system, your farming system.
Okay. This project, or this session, is really about sustainability. What are the really positive sustainability outcomes that you're looking for from this project?
There's a couple of potential ones. From the foliar disease perspective, depending on the cropping system, there may be opportunities to adjust spray programs. At the moment in Tasmania, we spray on a calendar basis, essentially, and the blights are managed incredibly well. We're really fortunate we don't have some of the nasty mating strains for lake blight, for instance, that Europe and the US have, where lake blight is just horrendous and very difficult to manage. We do manage these diseases incredibly well, but at the moment we use prophylactic sprays to do that, and that's fine. We're not advocating that needs to change per se. But by monitoring or by developing a model, there may be opportunities to say, well, actually, maybe I don't need to spray. Now for some, the sort of calendar sprays with helicopters, and it's pretty difficult to kind of change that when you're doing a district. But for those that are managing their own spray systems, it may be possible to say, well, I don't need one, or I don't need two, or I don't need three, and there could be cost savings there. There'll also be reduced pressure on development of resistance for those pathogens. But even at the very least, by understanding when, it's actually a significant, risk period now, I better go out and actually take a closer look at my crop and actually make sure that I'm not missing something. Because occasionally, we do still have outbreaks and do have issues that need to be dealt with. So better management, perhaps reduced spray and reduced cost. From a soil-borne perspective, we were really very, very early in that process of even getting, appropriate interventions for soil-borne disease. But as I said, it's somewhat of a bit of a black box. We've got some tools like the predictive PT system where we can test and work out how much pathogen we have in the soil to start with, and that's great. that tells us one aspect of the whole disease process. We know what we plant, in terms of the variety, and we know varietal resistance. That helps a bit too. But then it's kind of, we really don't understand what's happening during that whole growing process until we harvest at the end, and then we go, oh my God, there's massive amounts of pink rot. So what can we do? By better understanding, again, how this disease is progressing, it may allow us to make better decisions. For instance, chasing the yield at the very end of the season when things are starting to senesce. there's still some plants there. We're tossing on a bit of nitrogen, tossing on some more water to try and get some yield in those last few plants. We might actually be creating the environment that's actually absolutely perfect for pink rot to take off. So we get an extra 10% yield and we lose 30-40% due to disease. Understanding that process, it might be, well, actually, no, let's just cut off the irrigation, let's burn everything off and actually harvest now, and we'll actually get a better outcome. So that there may be, in terms of profitability, but also in terms of loss. I mean, in the end, if we grow potatoes that rot, it's not terribly sustainable for anyone. It's much better to get them into the food system.
I think some of the knowledge is already out there, right? I mean, we probably need to optimize some of irrigation management practices and things like that. How do we utilize some of this knowledge and put it into a support system that can actually be more usable, I guess, and helpful for the growers and agronomists to actually look into as well? Because otherwise, it will be more just based on information. Like it's an information session that, for a lot of you guys, and in terms of, like what Calum was mentioning, pathogens there, but then what, And so we really want to make sure that we actually build up on that particular knowledge and put it into a support system to make sure that it becomes one of the sustainable tools that you guys can sort of utilize in the near future. But I guess going back onto from a Simplot perspective as well, we look at sustainability from the demand from the consumer and from the customers as well. That's really, I guess, for us is to really understand that what is it that we can do from a farming perspective that is sustainable, that is digestible to the consumer and the customers, because obviously they are asking a lot, what are sustainable practices, and we are doing a lot, but it's just we need to probably also put numbers behind it as well, to make sure that they can actually see it visually, that we are doing something in the background to actually reduce pesticide spray or fungicide spray and things like that. So that's something that we're looking to from a Simplot perspective.
One thing I'm intrigued about. Do you want? Yeah, go for it, Theresa. Jump in. I love this.
I was just going to say, is there a gap between the predictor results pre-season and then whether the plants get sick or not? Like, can the plants fight off the pathogen even though it's there, or is that generally a linear thing, or what's the relationship?
Look, good question. I mean, this is good. I get to be an academic in plant pathology 101. Disease. We talk about the disease triangle, and the pathogen is one really important component of that. Obviously, the potato is the other component. The environment is the third. The predictor PT gives us the pathogen numbers. And they have been it's been a really, really useful tool. So growers can get this pre-plant test done, and they can get a number, and they can go, well, okay, that paddock's got an awful lot of powdery scab in it. Maybe not a good idea to grow a seed crop in there because the risk is high. It's a risk. It doesn't mean you'll definitely get disease. It doesn't mean you won't get disease even if you've got low, because of those other components. So the environment is all of these, particularly soil-borne diseases, all of these diseases are environmentally driven. So if you've got a wet, cool season, that's a powdery scab year, and even with moderate amounts of pathogen, with a conducive environment and a susceptible variety, you're going to get disease. Or if it's a hot, dry year, you can have massive amounts of pathogen and nothing will happen. So I guess it's building on that tool we currently have, a pre-plant tool, and actually building in some of these other environmental factors to actually better understand, predict risk, but also to measure the impact of I guess, interventions.
One of the things that we're doing in this particular project is to actually utilize a dendrometer as well, and that we are actually going to attach onto mature leaves on potatoes to actually really understand, the amount of water that's been taken up by the plants. So So it measures electrical conductivity. Tell me if I'm wrong. Of the plants, and it actually measures how much water is actually being taken up by the plants itself. And so, because a lot of the times we use soil moisture probes, and we want to understand what water, how much water we've got in the soil and the rest, but not so much how much it's been taken up by the plants. So if there's water stress, for example, are they actually being taken up by the plants? We don't necessarily really understand that. And so a lot of the soil-borne diseases, for example, you start to get a lot of issues when you've got too much water, right? And so we want to understand from the plant perspective as well how this disease sort of developed in the plants and how the plants are actually coping with the environmental conditions. So that's where I guess Al Gracie is actually coming into this project as well and giving his expertise in terms of plant physiology for our trials.
Yeah, I must have been reticent at the start. I forgot to, we decided not to have lots of PowerPoints because everyone gets fed up with those, but perhaps I should have had, which is introduce the team as well. So apart from Audrey and a whole bunch of people from Simplot that are involved, we also have Jason behind here, Robert and Al Gracie from TIA also involved in the project. As I said, as amongst a bunch of agronomists and growers. So I mean that's an interesting point with dendrometer because soil probes measure what's happening in the soil, but when you have that interaction with a plant and disease, particularly a disease that's actually affecting the function of the roots, so you can have a plant growing in a certain environment with good healthy roots and it'll be sucking lots of water, and then you have a plant growing in that same environment with poor roots and it's sucking a lot less water. But the soil probe's measuring the same amount of water. But here we can actually measure the soil water. We can also measure what the plant is actually doing and use the plant as a probe and actually saying, because in the end, the ultimate game is what is the plant doing? How well is it growing? And that'll tell us how well it yields. So it's actually building a bit of new technology in there to actually augment traditional probes to see how that works.
Okay, I've got one final question to wrap up. And looking into a crystal ball into the future, what's one thing you think growers might be doing differently in 5 years' time to manage potatoes, whether it be the monitoring, the information they're collecting,
I was just going to say, this is a 2-minute answer. 1 to 2 minute answer, please.
No way. Stand on the road of those cream cones. Yeah.
We could.
Look. All information is power. I mean, I think growers. What we hope from this is that there'll be a better understanding of how diseases interact with the environment, how to best use the data you get in terms of making that decision making. I don't think there's going to be any one decision that growers make. It'll be dependent on the data they've got. So as I said, example may be that to avoid massive pink rot issues at the end of the season, if you're monitoring soil temperature, you realise the temperature's rising up, you've still got plenty of soil moisture, we've got a severe pink rot issue. What do you do about it? Terminate the crop, get it out, don't chase that last 10% of yield, and get a better outcome. It might be we can cut a few sprays. It might be we do put in that pre-plant fungicide. It might be we put on an in-crop Ridimil spray to actually help reduce disease.
Super diverse cover crops between every cropping season.
Super diverse cover crops between, yeah. I mean, even measuring the impact of that. I mean, although with that, your pre-plant pathogen level, this should hopefully you'll see an impact of that on that.
Yeah, so just as a point of interest, potatoes are going to go in here next season, so I will have a chance to do some of this work hopefully out there on my cover crop trial as well, which will be really nice.
But also on the soil structure aspect, which cover crops will have so you've got X amount of powdery scab pathogen in the soil, but that soil structure will affect the soil environment, which will affect the water holding capacity, which will affect, which will snowball down. So when you're growing your potatoes, you know, what impact will that have on the soil environment, on the amount of water that's there, the more waterlogging or otherwise that might lead to disease. So you'll be able to, hopefully be able to use tools such as this to say, well, actually that cover crop gave us a benefit on soil structure, which gave us a benefit on disease.
Not a bad effort, Calum. It's about 2 minutes.
He didn't make fun of Doug once, though.
I think Audrey should have the last
I
word.
think Audrey should definitely have the last word.
For us, it's more of understanding the critical infection period for you guys, right? And how I envision it would go is that if we're meeting a critical infection period during a cropping season, you know, couple of days before that critical infection, we would be able to predict it or tell you guys, you know, this is coming, and you know, you should be looking into a protection system being put out, you know, before the critical infection period. And so that hopefully will then get linked onto your yield aspect as well. So we could actually see an economic benefit at, you know, in that tool itself, as to like, if you spray at this particular timing prior to a critical infection period, this is the expected yield that you're probably going to get. So that's more or less where I see this tool leading to.
Okay, thank you very much, Audrey, Calum and Michelle, and honorary panel member Theresa. Really, really interesting discussion. Really interesting. Thank you. Okay, it's good to see quite a few of you have taken advantage of those takeaway potatoes. Those of you that didn't quite get there, there's plenty still there, so make sure you help yourselves in the next break. Go home and grow yourself some good spuds. All right, so we're into the next session. Now, to kick off this session, we've got a dual presentation from Alex Russell and Maria Rodriguez. Alex is from the mainland, but we're not holding that against him. He's grown up on a farm in the Riverina region and worked from farmhand to operations manager, as well as been involved in international agricultural development, managing projects in India and Vietnam. And he's come down here to join us and work in the TASAg Innovation Hub. So welcome to Tassie, Alex. Maria's background's in animal health, and she's passionate about building communities, the environment and sustainable agriculture. And she's looking forward to she's joined the hub as the adoption and extension officer also, focusing on working with farmers for learning and knowledge sharing. So Alex, there he is, and Maria, welcome to the virtual stage. Come on up.
All right. Thanks, Dugald. As Dugald just mentioned, we're both from the TASAg Innovation Hub, and it's one of 8. Oh, that might be easier. Yep. Thank you. It's one of 8 hubs. It's on. Look. Oh, there we go. It's one of 8 hubs established around Australia to promote improved resilience and innovation in the agriculture sector. So it's supported by the University of Tasmania and Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture through funding from the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. And it's really an effort by the federal government to improve regionally relevant research and extension, and the Tasmanian Hub is about representing farmers and researchers from Tasmania to ensure that we can continue to keep producing good food. Hopefully that works. We've got a bit of a vision here, and I'm going to recite some of these words but then go on. So the Hub's about ensuring Tasmanian farmers and farming communities are prepared for the social, economic and environmental impacts of drought and extreme events, and able to take advantage of the opportunities that climate change presents. Now, that's a challenging thing to get your head around, but it's all about ensuring that farming systems can maximise productivity in a world where the challenges that face food and fibre production are increasingly complex. And though I'm so I'm new to Tasmania, and so I've seen more floods than drought, so it's a bit hard to call ourselves the Drought Resilience Hub, which is what we are. But I recognise that both of these events are ongoing challenges for farmers and researchers in Tasmania. And I also recognise the opportunity in that is that Tasmania is better placed than a lot of regions in Australia and around the world to continue to produce food and fibre as it's become renowned for, good food and fibre. So working with a range of different partners, the Hub hopes to contribute to improving social, economic and environmental resilience. And we see resilience as the capacity to cope with disruptions like drought or flooding rains and continue to evolve in positive ways. And we know that farmers are well versed in this, farmers and researchers in agriculture, because it's a variable climate, variable systems that we're working with, and ensuring that what we do in that variable environment is a big part of our job. So we see economic resilience as the ability for, as ensuring farmers have the resources to make choices that maintain productivity and environmental sustainability by looking after soil, water and ecosystems. And social resilience, while our role as adoption officers in the Hub doesn't directly relate to social resilience, we see it as an important part. It's the glue that holds communities and communities together and supports the farmers and everyone else that's involved in the agricultural sector. And I met Grant earlier on from Loaves and Fishes, and I think that's the sort of work that comes at the it comes at the very harder end of that, and there's a whole lot more infrastructure that that we'd like to contribute to so that people don't get to that situation. So yeah, that's although that's outside of our purview, we think that it's it's days like this that people can come and say good day, and it's footy clubs, whatever else. There's a lot of stuff that we can do that we don't see that sort of maintains our work and your work. So I'll hand it over to Maria.
So who is involved or who can get involved with the Hub? The simple answer is everyone in the ag space. Of course, Tasmanian producers from any industry, but also the wider players, non-government organization, government organization, community groups. And of course, we have already some partners that are formally involved with the Hub, but it doesn't imply that we're just going to interact with these formal partners. And one of the aims of the Hub is really to interact with all these players, or everyone in the community, the farmers, the wider industry, so we can increase the collaboration in this industry. We already know and appreciate there's a lot of things that are on the move, a lot of knowledge has been generated, and we don't intend to reinvent the wheel. All we want is to allow for that access of the valuable and relevant information for Tasmania. And in doing so, we also want to have open conversation with farmers so we can do the capacity building activities that are going to meet their needs. And we know that a lot of the work that the researchers are doing is going to meet these already. So we don't want to do anything new, we just want to bring what's already there. And in that sense, one of the things that we are already having on motion is on-ground projects. So we have 13 projects on the ground. We won't give you an overview of all of them, but if you want to learn more about them, do come and have a chat to us later. We're in the little shed up here. But we're going to give you a brief overview of 2 projects. But really, overall, what these projects want to achieve is to create opportunities for the extension and adoption of new knowledge and practices. And that's really our goal here, to be able to extend those new practices or even ongoing practices to other places of Tasmania, so we can really contribute to the wider goal of resilience for the Tasmanian farmers. So one of the projects we have going in the ag innovation space is a drought management tool developed by AgLogic. AgLogic is also here. So do come and have a chat to them if you want to learn more about this amazing tool. But overall, what this tool provides is climatic information, soil information, and the aim is to be able to allow the farmers to be prepared, make decisions that are informed, and overall be adaptable to the changing conditions that we know are going to become the norm in Tasmania.
Thanks, Maria. And then the other project that we're just going to briefly talk about, like Maria says, there's a lot more information over at the stand, and there's a few other people from the hub. So seek out Liana and Sue. I'm sure a lot of you know Sue. But the one of the other hub projects is with the Cradle Coast NRM as well as Greenhams and Simplot. And the aim of this project is to improve adoption of practices that build healthy, productive and resilient soils in both beef and intensive horticulture businesses, and work focus on increasing soil carbon, water use efficiency and nutrient cycling, and thereby reducing reliance on expensive inputs that are becoming more expensive. Do you mind clicking that for us, Maria? So I think the important thing here is that the hub is all about that interaction between researchers and farm advisors. And we are here to facilitate that interaction as best we can. Obviously, a lot of interaction already happens. There's a lot of farmers and advisors here, but there's a lot of people that aren't here. There's a lot of people that aren't able to make these days, aren't aware of them, don't want to come for whatever reason. So we see the role of the hub as understanding why that is, and helping to remove whatever barriers there are between those two really important, integral parts of the system. And so, in addition to the on-ground projects, as Maria said, we understand there's lots of local initiatives. I think there's some good examples of that. There was a question about what happens if there's a weeds in the potato crop that will increase the fungal pressure. I mean, if that's a challenge that's out there, we'd like to know about it, and we'd like to be able to pass that on to the research community. Similarly, there was something about integrating some of the research that's done with Calum and Audrey, integrating that into a system so that farmers can have better access to that. We'd like to know about that as well. But the other important thing is we'd like to know what's missing. What don't we know? What's happening out there, and what is needed at a local level? Are there initiatives that support resilience and innovation that are happening out of our line of sight? What research hasn't seen the light of the day or is ready to be scaled out? What are our blind spots? What do farmers and farming businesses need to know or can share with the hub that we don't know? What's missing from the approach that we've just presented? Come and talk to us, because we'd like to know those things and more. Or even just come and talk to us, have a chat, because that's all about that social resilience as well.
Yeah, so what Alex is really trying to say is do connect with us. We're all about open conversations so we can get to the bottom of what's really needed on the ground. So if you read the QR code, you can save our email address as a contact on your phone. Otherwise, there's our email address for you to write it down, and we look forward to chat with you later. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks, Maria and Alex. I'm going to start that off by asking any questions. Mike.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that there is such a group around. For some time, I've been part of some groups where we were looking at developing of localised food hubs, where actually smaller producers can circulate their food back into. At the moment, with the supermarket situation, it keeps the smaller people out and takes innovative products out of it. But if you could have a localised food hub where local people could put food in, they could utilise modern technology where it's a little bit like you expand on the loaves and fishes, where it becomes a bit more commercialised. But making food available to the lower social economic people in our society, so that it could be delivered to the house the same as pizza deliveries or whatever, so they can look at it on their iPhone, see what's available this week. It can either be a prepared food or it can be a box of whatever's available. And I think we could beat the supermarkets their own game. So it brings the power back to the people.
And that's exactly what we want to hear. Those are the kind of initiatives that we want to get involved with. So we're all about, like Alex said, working with those farmers that are already doing innovation, but those of them that are not, we want to understand how we can get them all in the same boat.
Thank you, Mike. That's excellent. If there's no other questions, I think we'll push on because we do have to catch up on some time. All right? Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Thanks, Maria. So next up we have, I've got to make sure I get this right, yes, Dr. Harriet Walker. So Harriet's a graduate from our teaching program, has recently done a PhD in viticulture, is involved in the critically important to us student outreach program of encouraging new students into agriculture as a career, but also has been working with sea urchins, which is an interesting thing on the face of it, isn't it? So Harriet, do you want to come down and tell us all about sea urchins and what's up with sea urchins? Thanks.
Hello. So in keeping with this innovation theme, if you like, today I'm going to be talking about a project that we're working with the help of IMAS, which is the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Science that we're partnered up with, and also that's funded with the Fisheries Research Development Council and the Abalone... Oh, no. The Abalone Reinvestment Fund. So we've all heard of repurposing food waste, if you like. We've all heard about compost. We might have even heard about marine waste in particular, so fish compost and whatnot. So today is probably a little bit left field for you, sea urchins. Why are we talking about sea urchins? So in the next couple of slides, I'll give you some context, if you like. Got this working now? Beautiful. So I don't know if anyone goes diving or fishing down the east coast of Tas. Yes. Have you seen these pesky little guys, or rather big guys? There we go. So the long-spine sea urchin, or Centrostephanus rogersii, previous to 1970s wasn't really a problem within Tasmania, but we've been talking a little bit about climate change today, and one of those effects is the warming ocean temperature. So that has allowed now these long-spine sea urchins to migrate down from the eastern coast of Australia down to the east coast of Tasmania. And while they're such a problem is because they're heavy grazers of kelp, and so much so that they create what we call these barrens, urchin barrens, which you can see in the photo here, and essentially wipe out the kelp beds and kelp forests, and they're really persistent. So in particular, the long spines, they have a special technique of shutting down their systems, if you like, so they can subsist on very little food, and that means that it really doesn't give the marine environment any potential to remediate, so the algae to regrow or reform. And by doing so, they're displacing, IMAS predict, around 150 other marine species, some which are culturally and economically important, such as the black-lipped abalone. And there's about 18 million of these guys now down the east coast of Tasmania. So surveys that IMAS did from 2002 to 2017 saw a 75% increase in population density. So they're beginning to be a real problem. So what can we do about it? Well, luckily enough, there are some sea urchin fisheries around. The big one that we've partnered with is True South, that's located in Electrona, down south. Is that me that keeps doing that, or is that magic? I don't know. I'm just going to put that down there. So luckily enough, there is a small fishery industry. That is magic, honestly. Okay, luckily enough, it might be the wind. There is a fishery industry. I'm just going to chat on, shall I? There is a fishery industry, and what they're interested in is the roe, which is that nice little yellow substance there, which essentially the urchin's gonads, which each to one's own. Don't know if anyone's tried it. It's an acquired taste. I personally don't mind it that much. It's all right. But the problem is this roe is only about 10% of the actual sea urchin by weight. So we've got all this leftover product after we've harvested it. And at the moment, it essentially is deemed a waste product and goes to landfill. So we saw this as a really good opportunity to team up with IMAS, it's actually switched now, to see if this product has, or this waste product can be used in an agricultural context. So we have a few project aims, if you like. The first one is to stop the economical, social and environmental burden of the sea urchin waste being dumped. So we've been given estimates that can cost up to $2,500 a month for them just to, get it dumped, get it retrieved and get it dumped. Social, so they're located in Electrona. They essentially get it taken to a paddock nearby. We know that in its whole form, it doesn't biodegrade very easily, so it can be, as you can imagine, and you'll probably get to, if you want to get up and close lately, I've got some product with me. It is a little bit fishy, so it does have an odour to it, and also just the environmental burden of it being dumped on a paddock somewhere as well. The next aim is to create a new sub-industry to generate income and reduce the reliance on harvest subsidies. So at the moment, because sea urchins, or the long-spine sea urchin, is such a problem, the government does provide a subsidy for fishers to go fish it. But as we know, subsidies don't last forever. And the subsidy has allowed the sea urchin industry within Tasmania to expand, but for its continued profitability, I guess it'd be nice to move away from the subsidies. And by also promoting this other income stream, there's that further promotion of actually harvesting it as well as a means of population control. And I guess the last aim, which I'm excited about and we're more so excited about, is that, can we create an agricultural product here that is actually beneficial to soil health and plant growth? So how do we do this? We got a fancy processor from China, funnily enough. Again, if it flicks through, I'll probably just leave it at this point. But essentially, the sea urchin waste, which is the shell, the spines, sometimes it has a bit of gut contents in there. It all gets funneled into a screw press, which separates the liquids from the solids. The solids proceed into a chamber, which is heated, and they're continuously turned. It's an enclosed chamber, continuously turned by paddles. So what we found, as you would predict, is that the longer that we had the product in there, the drier the product became, and also the finer the particle size is. So we've played with a few different product processing times, if you'd like. Usually see it at True South during peak season. They're kind of looking at 4 tonnes of sea urchins per day that they're processing, and the chamber holds about 4 tonnes. So for them, a starting point of 14 hours is a really good, time frame, but we also looked at 24 hours and 48 hours of it as well. So what we all want to know is it any good? So after this point, we got it analysed, and so essentially we found that, it's relatively high in nitrogen, especially compared to other marine byproducts, especially those available on a commercial market. And so, it's nothing compared to your synthetic fertiliser. We're looking at about 1%, and I've got a fact sheet in the shed near the coffee machine as well, which has all the nutrient profile breakdown there. But what we did see, and what was kind of expected, is that it's high in calcium. So obviously the shell structure is made out of calcium carbonate, so it's about 35% calcium. And we also saw that it was quite enriched with other beneficial micronutrients such as boron and zinc and iron as well. In the testing phase, we assessed the product against the Australian standards for soil conditioners, composts and amendments. So it met all those criteria as well. So that includes looking at heavy metals, includes looking at organic contaminants and pesticides, looking at some of those like salmonella, fecal coliform, some of those microbial bits as well. So after we got all this, we proceeded to the next steps, which is our trial step. So we could look at the product in 2 ways. Either we can look at it more as a fertiliser product, or we could look at it as a liming plus product. In the first trial, we're mostly looking at it in a fertiliser sense. So in this way, we used it in sunflowers, and we applied different rates from 1% to 10% of this sea urchin waste. And in this way, we didn't actually add in any additional fertiliser. So our control was a Hoagland solution, which if anyone knows Hoaglands, it's actually quite excessive fertiliser, it's a high fertiliser. It's used in the high rate, so we compared it to that, and we didn't add any other fertiliser to the sunflowers. And so what we found is that the more sea urchin that we applied, the taller, the increased plant growth that there was. This is also correlated in bits like stem width and flower size as well. And we saw that the plants were actually taking up the nutrients from the sea urchin too. So you can see, especially looking at the nitrogen, dear me, as the more sea urchin was applied, the more nitrogen that we found in the shoot. And it's important to note that we only looked at the shoot nutrient content, so we saw some other trends with other nutrients. So we saw that with increased sea urchin application, there was a decrease in soil potassium, phosphorus, zinc and iron, signifying that the sunflowers were taking up that those nutrients that were supplied by the sea urchin. One of the more significant things that we saw was quite a climb in soil pH. So even at 1%, we're seeing an increase of about 1 pH unit. So that was really significant for us to have a look at further. And to do this, we looked at green beans, and we looked at it further as a liming product in the way that we wanted to create a product that actually had a finer particle size. Once you look at the product in the shed, you will see it's not a very homogeneous product. So there is some finer particles in there, but there's certainly some bigger bits. You might even see some little bits of spine in there. So as a liming product, we were looking at the finer the particle size and how that might affect the liming ability of the product. So to do this, we also looked at 2 different soil types. We looked at a sandy loam and a clay, and we calculated how much of the sea urchin product we were going to put on based on the particle size that we're going to use, which we made by sifting the product rather than leaving it in the processor. We sifted it to that finer particle size, and we also based it on the calcium content of the product to generate the effective neutralising value. So the rates are slightly different to what we use, but we were essentially trying to create a 1.0 pH unit increase in the soil. So what we found is, I should say, that the start is actually a few days after we applied the sea urchin, which is why it's higher. So the most significant thing to compare is the control, which is the blue. We also compared against, I guess, a standard liming product, which is dolomite, and we've got our finer treatments as well there in micrometers. So we can see that the finer the particle size, at least initially, the greater the climb in soil pH, but over time, this didn't seem to matter as much. So by the end, we didn't see a significant difference between the different particle sizes of the sea urchin product in terms of their liming ability. But what we did see is a significant difference between both the dolomite and the control. And this was really interesting because it kind of meant that the product actually performs way better than what we thought. And by using those standard, E and V calculations, it's actually performing better than that. So this is I only have 10 minutes today, so that was kind of the background information that I wanted to give you. And now I kind of have a little spiel about what we've got going on in the field. So as we know, we're kind of limited by pot trials. We can't necessarily take exactly what we see in pot trials and apply it to a field setting. So I've applied the sea urchin product in a vineyard down south and also in an apple orchard. And what we're looking to do here in Forth, which Doug and I'm surprised he hasn't changed his ringtone to a specialised ringtone for me now to just avoid the call because we've been trying to get it in for the last 3 months, and as you know, it's been particularly difficult up here. So the plan is to get it in and sow in some potatoes, but the crop may change depending on what happens in the next little bit. But that's our plan, and essentially we're not using it as a straight fertiliser product, we're using it more as a liming plus product. So in all the trials we've used different rates. So in the vineyard we've looked at a 10 tonne per hectare rate up to a 20 tonne per hectare rate. the apple orchard, we've gone up to 12 tonnes, and at Forth here we'll go up to 12 tonnes. And all this is kind of based on that initial soil pH. Obviously, we don't want to raise the pH too high, and also the soil type. So in the apple orchard, it's sandy soil. In the vineyard, it's black cracking clay, and in here we've got a fertiliser. So that covers a nice amount of crops and also a nice amount of soil types. So I'm really excited to see what happens in Forth, and hopefully if I get to present again, I'll have some new information for you. So thank you.
Thanks, Harriet. Very interesting, and some seafood for thought. There's a dad joke for you. Had to come out sooner or later. Okay, so anyone got any questions for Harriet about sea urchins and what about them?
So you said that you get the sea urchins just from their productive systems, or do you go out and catch them like they do with the sea star?
Yeah, so I don't, but the company does. So they're very similar to abalone, like they actually have to dive to fish them and then chisel them off the rocks, so it is rather intensive. That being said, they have a pretty high value, at least in export markets, so they're very highly valued in like Hong Kong and Japan, and we have some really good quality sea urchins from down here. So it's a kind of a premium industry. It's definitely worth them doing. But yeah, their problem is all this waste product that they're paying a lot to get rid of. So, yeah.
Mike?
What is the nitrogen content? I'm sorry. What is the nitrogen content?
It's only around 1%, which, according to who you talk to, so the apple grower that I'm working with in the south, he's an organic apple grower. So to him, 1% nitrogen is great. But I'm aware for veggie producers, it's not so great. That's why I'm kind of looking at it. In the sunflower trial, we were focusing on it as a fertiliser just to see its potential. But in reality, you're not going to use that much of the product because you're also going to see that sway in soil pH. So to get it up to a point where you want the fertiliser abilities of it, you're also going to be raising your soil pH really high, which is kind of defeating the purpose as well. So that's why I'm kind of seeing its potential more as this liming plus product. Yeah.
Please.
Is it a chitin product as well, or is it just a calcium carbonate?
Just the calcium carbonate. So other things have been done with sea urchins or similar, like oyster shells and bits like that, extracting chitin and other bits and pieces. This is essentially a very economically friendly method of just taking the raw product and grinding it down. Yeah, but they haven't, at least the fishery that we're working with, haven't looked at other non-agricultural solutions or whatnot to use their waste as of yet. Yeah.
So there is a chitin content, or there's not? There is.
Yeah.
So if you looked at, so my rudimentary understanding is that, our fungi are made out of chitin, and feeding the soil chitin, does it improve, fungal composition of the soil? Do you know?
Yeah.
Have you looked
We
at that?
haven't done any microbial work yet, but we will. There has been a researcher that's based out of Spain, I'm pretty sure. So there's like minimal research into this. One researcher has, and he did see differences in the soil diversity. Again, it was a pot trial, so a little bit harder to see those effects on a field scale and monitor that over time. So I think that's what would be interesting to look at for sure.
All right, then I think we're done for questions. Thanks very much, Harriet. Right, well, this is where I get to introduce myself, so I've already done that, so we can move right on. I first talked about this research investment we've attracted, looking for new crops that are herbs for traditional medicines, and we planted the first, we sowed the first seeds and transplanted the first transplants last season, so this is 1 year into the research hub. So I wasn't sure how many people would have been here last year, so I've got a little bit of repeat on the introduction from last year, and then I'll update with new results that we've brought to light. So there's a very strong international demand for traditional herbs. It's a global market. What was traditionally based on wild harvest is now depleted and endangered in the wild. So new product is cultivated. The issue with cultivated product is always around quality, because with this product, it's all about the bioactives in the product. There is morphology and various sensory aspects taken into account by physicians particularly in China, that have a lot of experience with this, but most of the standards are based on chemical assays of bioactives. So the question was, do our climate and soils match enough to grow these crops to develop the levels of bioactives that we need to develop to be competitive in a global marketplace? Can we grow the crops economically? Is it feasible? Because in China in particular, Korea and places like that, they use a lot of hand labour. Cost of labour is a lot cheaper, and so they're very different production systems, often very small scale. And as I alluded to around the quality, does the sensory and chemistry of the bioactives stack up? So I'm just going to cover off on some of the crops that we've got in the ground over here in the nursery paddock that we can also look at later this afternoon for those of you that are interested, with your booties on because of the biosecurity issue that's recently come to light. Angelica sinensis, so female ginseng. So last year I had photos in China of whole paddocks bolting. This year I've got a photo with, I think, one plant bolting. It hasn't come out very clearly, unfortunately. But what researchers in China had found with this crop is it is susceptible to bolting, and we were very concerned about that being an issue in our warmer climate. But as you can see here, we're very pleased to report we only got 2% bolting in sinensis, and in a related species, Dahurica, we've got 7% bolting. So we're not seeing that as much of an issue as we thought it could have been, which is very good news. We bombed out completely on sowing seed, and that's a generic finding for virtually every crop that we've trialled. On the flip side, transplants have been quite successful, and I believe we could probably get that survival rate up further once we sort of finesse hardening off of the seedling material out of the nursery. We were probably a bit too keen to get stuff out into the paddock, and some of the material was probably a bit small and a bit soft. And having worked with the nursery industry in my PhD, I should have known better, but I was impatient. We don't actually have any PhD students working on this crop yet, but we've just recruited one, and he's arriving from China next week. Okay, astragalus. So this was the species that we first got seed in from China, and so that was just pre-COVID. And since then, the borders have essentially closed. It's been a real challenge to get propagation material, and we've been going to companies in America, Europe, and Australia for propagation material. But we got some really good material out of China just in time that got through biosecurity, legally, obviously. As a couple of other seed lots didn't get through because they had weed seed and stones and things like that in them. The astragalus was clean and came through, no worries. And so we've been working the longest on astragalus. So it's a member of the pea family, as you can, well, you can't really tell, I'm sorry. The leaf is a very typical sort of pea leaf morphology. What the harvested product is obviously the root, and what's really desired by the market is the long whip-like roots, whereas the forked roots not so desired and a much lower price in the marketplace. Unfortunately, it has a great propensity to fork. So then you end up all forked up. Okay, but when it comes to working in the nursery, you can't grow it in potting mix because it hits that pine bark and it just literally goes sideways. So that's an issue that we've found with the astragalus. So getting it out of the soil is another challenge. So I nearly busted my back trying to get it out, despite Doug's very good soil preparation and the good soil health, I think, Theresa, of the nursery paddock. It is a challenge because you want long, narrow whips, but then you've got to extract that. So that's a practical consideration. And 91% survival, pretty happy with that too. We've had one PhD student working on the production side and the others working on post-harvest. And post-harvest involves drying, slicing, dicing, various things like that. We've been looking at temperatures and different treatments, including steaming, to try and maintain the levels of those bioactives, because what you get at harvest is not necessarily what you get in the pharmacy or when the client buys it, but that's what we've got to maximise. Just similar to a fresh product, really. Okay, Platycodon grandiflorus, Chinese bellflower. So it's an ornamental, and we bought some seed from Bunnings, and it wasn't very good. But that was more for some props, because we're expecting some visiting people from China. We thought it'd be nice for them to see some Chinese bellflower. So yeah, don't get bellflower from Bunnings. So we haven't had a student to work on this yet, really. We have grown plants on and harvested our own seed and found that seed actually germinates really well, as opposed to the seed we purchased previously. So obviously fresh seed is what you need. Bit of a lower transplant survival, but again, I think we could probably optimise that. But this one's to just keep your eye on, because we'll have a new student working on this one over the next 12 months. Polygonatum, Sibiricum and Multiflorum. So Multiflorum is the European one. It's quite a common garden ornamental. It is used as a traditional herb, but there's other species that are high value in the marketplace. But we couldn't get seed out of China for the Sibiricum, so we've used Multiflorum as a proxy, as like just a species to trial on, because it's quite similar morphologically and biologically. They're shade-loving understory plants, so they sort of grow naturally under canopies in sort of forests. So we have included different levels of shade intensity in the trial down here, 30, 50 and 70%. We certainly saw some transplant shock in the Multiflorum. Sorry, it's gone fuzzy because I've zoomed in on it, but what you're supposed to be seeing around the margins is necrosis and some chlorophyll bleaching, just as you'd expect from transferring to an open light environment of a species that likes partial shade. This season, when they've come out, we haven't seen that. So I guess it was the transfer that induced this last season, and so this season the plants outside are looking surprisingly good. So that's something that is promising. May not need a shade structure to be growing this one. Yeah, we recently thought we got seed, and now we don't. We still can't get it out of China across the border. So again, we've got a problem with getting hold of propagation material. Okay, so the marketing people still haven't improved the common name for this one since I last spoke to you. Poor man's ginseng. So Cotinopsis, this is one that is grown very small scale commercially in Tasmania by Gould's Pharmacy farm down Allen's Rivulet. This year I can show you photos of our plants that are down in the paddock down here. Some photos out of China where you see the manual labour in the way they're washing the material after it's been harvested, and they then do this kneading process. And what we think it does is actually sweeten the product. We think it somehow cleaves the glycosides, the sugar moiety of some of the bioactives, and so the doctors actually taste it and smell it as a measure of quality, and that has a rough correlation with the bioactives in it. We had a fellow in China working on this, and he's taken some of these photos, and he hopefully arrives in the next few weeks if he can get his visa sorted. So, yeah, the importance of genetics on bioactive quality. So we can grow plenty of biomass. The bioactives aren't really there in the levels we'd like to see. And we think that could be genetics, but we don't yet have the variety of material to test that hypothesis. Oh, this is a photo he took on his study tour. So he went travelling around the Dugald regions in China. So Dugald is the regions where the most premium product comes out of, and it's based on genetics, growing approaches and farming techniques. And this was just obviously showing they're using a plastic mulch. That's what is here, can't really see it, just to optimise the growing of the root. Here we've got the latest PhD student that's joined the hub, Celia, who's here today. Yeah, Celia, wave your hand, that's it. Celia was here last year and got talking to us and decided this was something that was of interest to her, and she started a project looking at peony. So we obviously have commercial production of peony for the cut flower market. It's a quite valuable Chinese herb, the root that is, but that material's obviously been selected and used for that purpose and also managed for that purpose. So we're not quite sure yet if the bioactive pennyflorin in our sort of flowering varieties is going to cut the mustard, and or if we can manage it differently to increase the levels of bioactives in that product. Right, so just some general findings to wrap it up. So direct sowing, unless we're doing it wrong, you can pretty much forget it, but we were pretty careful. It was great site preparation. We had a really good soil tilth. We were getting down on hands and knees with tweezers. I'm used to getting sunburnt in my bald head on the top, but I got sunburnt all down my neck from trying to transplant, sow these seeds. So that was really a waste of time. So we learnt what not to do there. Yep, transplants established pretty well, but the hardening off process is important. We're going to have to work on optimising that. Weed control is problematic, so we've been doing hand weeding. That's difficult, particularly when sort of casual labour doesn't know what's a weed and what's not a weed. So we've had a few issues there, despite the excellent efforts of Ann-Maree and Kathryn to sort of manage the process. But probably need to look at the densities of the crop to try and outgrow those weeds as best as possible. We haven't yet seen any obvious pest or disease issues. There's been plenty of snail bait put down. We were worried about birds to start with, but birds didn't cause any issues. So pretty good on that front so far, until the biosecurity incident that came to light in the last few weeks. So until we discovered the broom rape that probably came in with the Angelica seed, that could have come from one of two companies that we've cordially and diplomatically informed. So we'll be managing that issue going forward, unfortunately. We have sort of concluded that it's very difficult to predict quality based on climate differences. It's very much down to the genetics and the biology of the particular plant species. So you can't just do a natural matching of climate and predict where it'll grow. Obviously extremes can knock plants out in any climate, but I think the success of avocados on the northwest coast is a great example of the plasticity of some crops and how they can succeed in different environments, and you can't always predict it. Okay, so some of this seed is basically wild type seed. So it's not been bred and selected for, or if it has been selected for, it's been pretty rough and ready. So we've seen great variability individual to individual. And so that's a management challenge in its own right, obviously. It's also a research challenge. So we're getting different rates of development, particularly when it comes to flowering. And so that's something to be aware of. And also, so what we've had to do with astragalus, for example, is go to selecting clonal material and tissue culturing it so that we can potentially do other research and get results that are based on the treatment not swamped out by genetic variability. So that can be a strength, but it's also obviously an issue. And we're also concluding that the quality is highly dependent on the genetics. So sourcing the material is really a key issue when it comes to Chinese medicinal herb crops. Oh, no. Okay, so the team is expanding. Sandy has recently retired, but she's kindly making herself available. She's a plant chemistry expert, so we're really relying on her in analysing the bioactives. Alita's really stepped into that role and is taking up those reins. And Mr. Shilin Dai arrived from China a few months ago. He teaches Chinese medicine and herbs at Nanjing University, so he's a great asset to us in helping us out with lots of general information. And Mr. Zheng Jiang, he's arriving soon, hopefully. Theresa and Hui have been working on the astragalus. Celebrity Celia, I've already mentioned. And Jenny, Tony and Jacko are industry partners at AMG over in Melbourne. So I'd like to acknowledge our industry partners. Professor Hu from Nanjing University of Chinese Medicine is giving us some great advice. We've also received support and advice from Ronald and Marlene Winkle and Greg Witten. And I'd very much like to thank Ann-Maree, Kathryn, Doug and Ant at the Forthside team here for making it all happen, because they're absolutely critical to making everything happen here. So good on them. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Dugald, considering they're medicinal herbs, do you have to? Is there a requirement that you grow them without any pesticides, or?
So the quality control analysis of any batch includes analysis for pesticides, just like fresh fruit or fresh product, and heavy metals as well. There's obviously been instances in China where things haven't been perfectly managed, and so they're quite exacting around quality for that reason, and that's potentially an opportunity for us. Yeah, I mean, the reality and also the reputation for well-managed product.
Dugald, I was just curious, what's the process of measuring the bioactives?
So it mostly involves, so there's known, in most cases, there's known bioactives and a percentage that they might be expecting as a quality sort of standard. We are extracting in solvents or water. We're usually using mass spectroscopy to confirm what that chemical, what those compounds are, and we're often comparing with standards from Sigma Aldrich or something like that to quantify what's in the product, so against a standard. So it's a standard kind of liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry approach.
Yeah, on importing the seeds, are the seeds steam treated? Are they, is potentially the native biome responsible for some of these bioactives, and is there plausibility that this has been disrupted in the importation process?
Well, hopefully it is totally disrupted in the importation process, because we're not wanting to bring anything else in other than the seeds. Yeah. So they have to come in with a phytosanitary certificate. I don't know if they're steaming at their end, but it has to be entirely clean and satisfy both Commonwealth and then state quarantine departments. So it gets inspected at both stages before it comes through. And then how it interacts with, so, the general ecological theory around these bioactives is their defences against plant pathogens or plant herbivores or any plant stresses in general. And it is entirely plausible that because we don't have those pathogens or stresses, that the bioactives won't be increased to equivalent levels. And I suppose some of our cultural treatments, we're thinking about how we might induce stress, which is a bit opposite to how you'd grow a standard vegetable. So we're not after biomass, we're after yield in terms of bioactive concentration. And so we're trying to optimise allocation of carbohydrates to the below ground, for example, and we're thinking about how we might use plant growth regulators or other elicitors to induce stress that would up-regulate the plant response in terms of bioactives. Was that what you were coming at?
Oh, it's interesting, nonetheless.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting.
Very quickly. My question is, if you're growing these in the ground, which I'm assuming you are, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
What's the capacity, and I suppose the answer is how long is a piece of string, for the plant to escape? How weedy could they be? Could there be any escape into the natural environment? Because when bringing anything in, that's also a concern, because obviously if they're grown in China, then the natural environment is designed for those particular species of plants. Here we're different, and as we know, there's things escape here which don't escape in their home country.
Yep. Yep, true. So the vast majority of weeds have escaped from people's gardens, but the agricultural sector is not completely innocent, obviously. So the Australian Biosecurity Service has a database where they've done a thorough weediness review of every product that's allowed to be imported into Australia, and you need an import licence to bring that product in. If it's not on the database, there has to be a review from the ground up on the risk of weediness of that crop. So we've only brought in and trialled crops that are on that database that have passed that review by the professional biosecurity officers in Canberra. And we have considered bringing in other crops. We have considered going into a review process in order to allow us to bring other crops in down the road. But because of the length of time and the uncertainty of the outcome, we haven't yet gone down that road. Yeah, so we've certainly been very thorough because the last thing we want to do is be associated with weed outbreak. Okay, I'll wrap it up for question time. Thank you very much for your questions. And now we're moving right on to a panel session to finish up this this session of the day. And so I'll just need a different sheet. So I'd like to invite Sue Hinton to come on down. So Sue has worked as an agronomist in Toowoomba before moving to Tasmania in 1986, where she's worked with many of the state's agricultural communities. Welcome, Sue. Are you going to come on down? Yep, good. Michael Badcock. Mike is a high-profile farmer in Tasmania's northwest coast. Mike's service includes to the TFGA, the Tasmanian Onion Growers Association, the Tasmanian Poppy Growers Executive, as well as being an all-round legend. So welcome, Mike. Thanks for being here and joining the panel. Don't be shy. Come on over. Ellie Hope with Simplot, so Bachelor of Ag Science graduate with honours. Ellie has worked as a researcher in TIA on primarily poppy and pea products, and even managed to put up with Alistair Gracie for that entire period. But in 2019, she finally cracked, became a field officer with the veggie crops before transferring over to R&D with Simplot. So welcome, Ellie. Doug Clark. Don't need to read the notes. So Doug Clark's been with us since 2017. Our world has never been the same since. But we're very lucky to have Doug as our farm manager, runs an excellent ship, and is extremely patient with researchers who can be very, very annoying. Okay, I'll hand it over to Sue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, everybody sort of dated me as an old chook in Tasmania, but that's okay. I still have a great passion for agriculture, and I guess today we're here looking at things that can help us with innovation and sustainability, which is kind of a bit of a rough theme for what we're talking about today. So, guys, I'm going to hit you with a couple of questions that we've cooked up just to get things rolling. So I might start with you, Mike. Obviously, you've been around as long as I have, because I've met you at just about everything I've been to in Tassie since I arrived here. So, but as a vegetable farmer, I guess looking in the context of sustainability and innovation, what would you see as the key challenges for the vegetable industry moving forward, and how's that potentially changed for you in the last, say, 20 years as a farmer?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think farming's very exciting, always has been, and I think we're looking at some very exciting times going forward. There's world food shortages evolving. I think in the Tasmanian situation, an uncle of mine who started VCon off, he said, you've got to look at your unfair advantages. And Tasmania has a lot of unfair advantages. And I think we've done well in the processing crops like peas, beans and potatoes. I think the future, we need to keep them for your cash cow, but I think our future is looking at things like these Chinese extractive crops, a lot of other protected cropping. Where we're looking forward at the moment is probably the most exciting time I've probably ever seen in agriculture. I think there's some good times coming for farmers. I think the world food shortages are evolving. I think the important thing is getting people working together. I think the Forthside research stations here is perfect. I'd like to see some groups of people come in with your medicinal crops, get a group of interested farmers come in to actually be part of that, and when things start working, they can take it away and grow it. But I think we've got to work closely with UTAS, TASAg, the whole works, and pull people together.
Thank you, Mike. And I guess just bringing a little bit of insight from somebody who's been around for a while and been involved with the very, very early stages of the poppy industry and the beginnings of the pyrethrum industries. They were both pioneering industries which are now fairly, significant players in the world market. Both of those industries roughly provide 50% of the world market. So who knows, Dugald, you could be at the beginnings of something really amazing. And that's what we need to look at. Thanks,
yes, that's right. Yeah, well, I was thinking our family was one of the first to grow both the pyrethrum and the poppies, but Forthside had a really big influence on those developing crops, so we'd like to see some more coming along.
Yeah, excellent. So we might move along to you, Doug. I don't like that evil grin. So we're going to change gears just a fraction, and Doug, I'd like to ask you if you could share your experiences with us on the recent, innovations that have happened here at Forthside, and particularly how's the new irrigation infrastructure impacted on you in terms of time savings and, decision making around irrigation with the data that you get from all the new whistles and bells and things that you've got here on the farm?
I love an easy question. Look, the research outcomes of Forthside, I'll start on that. So traditionally Forthside's been about the bread and butter crops, like peas, poppies, beans, early on, soldier settlement type stuff, and of which we've industry's taken that on more. Ellie will probably touch on that later, but certainly our industry partners have taken that on, so we're slightly less active in that environment. But for our researchers at the moment, so Forthside's for Tia obviously, conduct their research, but we have other users of the site, so Simplot, McCain's, pyrethrum guys, whoever that may be. Also Arvinus, chemistry side of it as well, so the actual outcomes, I was asked a question similar a couple of weeks ago, and I said it was hundreds, just without thinking about it. And I went on and thought about it, no, it's thousands. Like, it is literally thousands and thousands of individual little wins for agriculture along the way. So it could be different chemistry used on crops or how that chemistry is used. Yeah, can't measure it, sorry. Certainly on the irrigation side of it, so we were able to scruff hold of some cash and made some investments within Forthside. The outcomes for us has been huge. Labour savings, obviously a major one, and we'll touch on that in the group session for those that do the walk around later on. I can show you the automation and everything that's happening and demonstrate that for the day. But it's certainly the crop outcomes too, so we can apply water in a more timely manner and more efficient at the crop use and the stage that it's at. And certainly with the investment in new linear and the new hard hoses as well, it's the accuracy of application has increased through that, which is a really good win for us as well. Plus it's leisure time, so I can actually start pumps and that sort of thing while I'm sitting at home in the chair or out fishing, which is just fantastic. I get to use the site camera and make sure it's all going. My level of comfort is certainly increased. So it's always good on the home front too. You're not in the vehicle travelling, so and the family get involved in it too because they can sort of jump on and say, "Hey, look, Dad, the irrigator's going," and it's the education that gets to happen in the kitchen, and but they don't have to actually be on farm for all that. So
bring forward that next generation of youngsters with an interest in agriculture is awesome as well. Isn't it?
It's great.
Yep. Thanks, Doug. Okay, Ellie. Next, please. So, Ellie, you're actively involved in Forthside as a partner in research, and you've been involved in a lot of variety work here. So I guess my question to you is, you've been expanding the amount of variety work that you've been doing here over the last few years, and my phone's ringing, I'm sorry, it's in my ears, not in the room, but and I guess with your vegetable trials, how do you see that's helping growers and yourselves as a company build productivity and profitability and the options that you have for farmers with choice of varieties and things like that?
Forthside's a fantastic resource for us to be able to make our variety trials fairly ambitious, to get across as many options as were provided by the seed companies that think they'll suit our climate. So the ultimate goal of our variety trialling program is to be able to support reliable supply of a high quality crop to the factory and to support our growers in being able to reliably produce a moderately, fairly consistent quality and high yielding crop year on year. So the growers aren't necessarily as involved in selecting the varieties that they grow because the way our program is so condensed. But we are continually looking for the best possible option for as many growers as we can, and hopefully getting to a point where we can start tailoring the variety choice more to the grower and management style and district, harvest window, all those.
So can I just ask another curly one? If we're looking at sustainability and that, are you actively looking at varieties that potentially have the same kind of productivity with perhaps less inputs and things, so maybe looking at, you know, less water or less fertiliser requirements and that type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, maintaining a reliable supply, so yield is critical.
Yep.
But on top of that, we'll look for almost any opportunities we can to make the farmer's operation that bit more efficient, or if a variety has a different different selling point that we can market to the customers to go, you should pay a bit more for this. This is great. We've got a fairly wide breadth of what we're looking for.
Fantastic, thank you.
And if I can continue on from that, it's the same with whether it be hemp or anything else, like days to harvest, day length, whatever the case may be. So, I mean, planting windows are essential. Like, it's, going back to hemp, I mean, you can manipulate that a little bit too. The same with peas or carrots or whatever else. It's trying to find those niches, I suppose, if we can. So.
Yep, definitely. Was anybody in the crowd like to ask a question? Alex?
I'll just yell. Ellie, you mentioned that you're looking for varieties that are the best option for as many growers as possible. How do you get that information? What can researchers in the hub learn from how you get that feedback?
So it's a very slow process. That's probably the number one thing. It's we have maybe 3 or 4 years of small plot trialling before we're comfortable enough to scale up to give it to a farmer to have a go. And ideally, down the road, we might have more small plot trials in different districts. So we're not taking an early variety that we've always had in a sort of coastal environment and then giving it to someone at Campbelltown. But it's tricky and it's a slow process, so that the risk is as low as possible.
Yeah, cool.
Alex, to probably just add to that, for Ellie, she's also got to dance to the tunes of the factory, and what processes, and they need to actually be able to have sample sizes to run through the factory and everything as well. So it's not just dealing with the farmers, it's the processing side as well, isn't it?
And commercial data is always the best possible data you can get.
Anyone else have a question? Oh, surely Doug hasn't stumped you all, no. Or Mike?
I'll take lunch, I don't mind.
Maybe.
We have a question outside, the gentleman in the green.
Apologies. This one's for Mike regarding the food hubs and obviously the work we do with you through Loaves and Fishes. What can Loaves and Fishes do from a farmer's perspective in terms of increasing the presence we have in agriculture and the influence we have on the people that are receiving the product and being made aware of different products that they maybe haven't seen before, and bringing that to more remote communities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I can see a great future for Loaves and Fishes. It'll possibly, where it's supplying free feed at the present time, free foods, I think loaves and fishes should become a little bit more commercial so that actually you can pay for some of the product that comes in. A lot of the unique products are out there. A lot of people have got some very innovative products, like small farmers and people starting to evolve. At the moment, they don't have an outlet anywhere for that product. So if you could open your arms and take on some of that product and use your own systems for getting rid of it. The local councils, you should work closely with them because they are quite concerned, and there has been a few projects along those lines in trying to facilitate it. I don't think we should reinvent the wheel and try and bring somebody else in. You've got loaves and fishes, you've got infrastructure starting there. So talk to government, see if we can get a few more dollars to help stimulate this, because it's a way I think we can help bring the community together to benefit the community.
Thank you. Any other paws up? No?
I might just bring another subject into it, if that's all right. Since we're part of UTAS and whatever, I think we've got a massive waste problem with our not quite right product and a whole heap of areas like that. I think we should be looking at value-adding opportunities or being able to dry the product. There is a process I went to the horticultural conference on the mainland recently, and there was a presentation from a guy out of New South Wales who dries product, and it's a process you can use on farm, and it started off with dried green banana flour, and that's a high in protein, but you can do it with any other vegetable product, and you can use the seed capsules, you can use everything. Very simple process, but we've got to look at all sorts of ways, I think, to utilise our waste product. I just feel sad as a farmer when, in a lot of cases, we're only utilising probably 60% of what we grow. We've put a lot of fertiliser into it, a lot of knowledge, a lot of soil, and all of a sudden it gets dumped. And I think that's a real sin.
Thanks, Mike. We've got a question from Theresa.
I know a few places in this valley are composting now, where perhaps they weren't before. And obviously there's other uses and maybe higher uses for food waste. But I think composting is really great for the things you can't use elsewhere. What are the challenges to composting? What do you see as holding farmers back? Why isn't everyone doing it? Any thoughts?
Yep, I'll start. Okay, economics. I think farmers are very much like greenies. We want to do the right thing and everything else, but if you haven't got the dollars, the resources behind it, we need better farm economy, and I think a lot of farmers would be utilising that. I think composting is one of the ways. It's part of the process, it's not the whole process, but I think it's important that all the goodies we produce, we should be able to put them back into the soil somehow.
Doug?
Yeah, it's economics basically. Like, yeah, if you don't have that key volume going through to maintain that pile, it's always difficult. And related back to my farm level here, yep, we certainly have some waste. We support loaves and fishes and other groups wherever we can. Other times I burn it. Sorry, got the pasting today, but anyway. Yeah, but it's basic logistics, I think, come the end of the day, and it's just, yeah, the efficiencies around it. So.
The compost property, you've got to spend some money. You've got to spend some real money. I mean, where they do it successfully in California, look at the climate. It never rains in California, as someone said. They're right. We dabble with composting here, and unless you cover right, unless you get your turners right, unless you get your temperatures right, like, it's hard work. So it's great, but here on the North West Coast, we've got some challenges. And unless you're really going to go in there and spend some money, you're wasting your time.
And it could just all get ruined.
And look, it needs to be done properly. No, you're right, economics, World and England.
Any further comments? Questions?
I'll give you another challenge then.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mike. I always like a challenge.
I think we overproduce food in Australia, and I think we should be putting a lot of emphasis into exporting product out of the country, and ways and means through the systems. I think we should be putting a lot more work into analysing markets around the world, looking at suitable products and what the world is actually wanting, instead of producing something and try and sell it into the world, we need to be getting around the world to find out what products that they want and what time of the year, and then come back here, do the trial work, work out what we can yield, what time we can process it and harvest it and everything else. But it's one of my pet things that we've got to get some product out of the country somehow.
Thanks, Mike. Yep, very good.
As an individual business or as a group?
Definitely as groups. I don't think individually we can. I think most businesses now are struggling to survive. Once upon a time when economics were better, businesses put a lot of effort into developing export crops. I think it's got to come back where we can pull people together, and governments, because you can't do it without government help. And government help when you go overseas to open some doors. And I think I really like to see government involving a lot of the younger growers in our system, take them overseas, have a look around, and they'll be our future exporters.
Yep. And there's certainly value in getting together in numbers to give you the volume that you'll need to access these markets.
And spread the risk.
Yep, definitely.
Just from a Simplot point of view, we currently can't supply all of the demand for our product because of our processing limited capabilities, so the demand's definitely there for Australian grown vegetables, even the baseline non-value added stuff.
Yep. Excellent. Well, thank you everybody. We might wrap it up now unless anybody's got one last incredibly burning question. If not, I'd like to say thank you very much to Mike, Doug and Ellie for their contributions to the panel.